So let's just get started.
All right,
That's the segue. I'm going to just let Dr. Beasley kick us off.
Let's call this meeting to order right now, 8:30 a.m.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started following the agenda. The first thing we have is Ms. Benton for the fiscal year 20 budget. So we're going to ask her to come, and I'll just preface by saying you will see, hopefully you've taken time to look over the information that we sent for Monday, and you'll see that we'll be basically talking about that information. The budget is really a process that allows us to balance competing priorities. Our goal, as you all know, is to raise the fund balance, but at the same time make sure that we respect that our teachers, we froze salaries the year prior, and so we're trying to make sure that we raise the fund balance, but at the same time move away from freezing salaries and give our employees the increases they deserve. So hopefully you will see that today. We have found what we believe is the right mix, and we'll let Ms. Benton lead us in the conversation. Feel free to just ask questions, any clarifying questions, comments, etc. We want to acknowledge our GSBA representative who's here. Thank you for being here on today. We're always glad to see you here in Clayton County, so thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
To the members of the board, Dr. Beasley, to my colleagues, to the members of the community, thank you for this opportunity to present the superintendent's proposed budget for fiscal year 2020 for your consideration. There are two important components of this budget. The first is revenues slightly exceed expenditures. The second component is we're not recommending any change to the millage rate. So we're going to jump right in. And if the board wants to follow me with your proposal that you received the proposed budget this week, you can follow me there. And also you can look at your budget development as worksheet. And you can see some of the numbers. But we're going to jump right in. Fiscal year 2020 begins July 1st, 2019, and ends June 30th, 2020. Before you is the budget development calendar that the board approved in October of last year. We had district-wide LTE count in October of last year, and this was for the purpose of determining FTE and also our positions for QE. Budget managers reviewed their current budgets. We met with them as a team. The budget team met with the budget managers and division heads, and we received their recommendation for budget increases. Throughout the month of January, site-based programs allotment budgets were developed for the schools. In the month of February, we spent time reviewing all of the requests that we received from across the district. We prioritized all of the budget requests and improvement requests for each division. Now we're in the month of March. The month of March, we spent primarily developing the budget for the Board of Education to review, and also for the public to review. On Monday, March the 25th, the budget will be presented for tentative adoption. And the board can see there are a number of things that happens after. Our consolidated tentative budget is $724 million for 2020. General operations make up 67%, or $485 million. Special revenue is approximately 9%. That is $63.2 million proposed for special revenue, and these are earmarked funds from grants and also from federal sources. The enterprise fund, which includes school nutrition as well as athletic, make up about 6% of the budget, which is $44.2 million. Capital outlay. Capital outlay is approximately 18% of the consolidated budget at $131.6 million. This includes expenditure for SPLOST 5 and SPLOST 6 in 2020. Many of you have seen this graph before us. The chart indicates the level of fund balance for the last 6 years and a projection of where the fund balance is expected to land at the end of the current fiscal year. The fund balance.
If I may pause you here, I think it's important for you all to know, last year when we ended at 19 million, our goal again was to ensure that we end this year in a better place. I wasn't really expecting 48 million, but because of the spending and savings and just really some good management, we are projected, it's a projection, we're projected to end at 48 million. Just remember this as a board, the goal is to somewhere be between 10 and 15% of your expenditures, so just remember that. You want to be somewhere between 10 and 15% of your expenditures. Anything above 15%, the state will give us an audit exception.
Right.
And so at the rate we're going, you all, and I say this, because at the rate that we're increasing the fund balance, we could be back up at the 82 million within a year or two, but that would be more than 15% of the expenditure. So we've got to make sure that we don't find ourselves in that situation, just having money and then we're getting audit exceptions. We've got to do something with those funds. 10 to 15%, yes, anything above that. So at the rate we're increasing from last year to this year, we will be in a good place. So we need to be very mindful that we don't want to find ourselves with a fund balance so high that then it becomes an audit exception.
The 2018 was 21 minus, right? It was minus 21 for 2018, our ending balance.
No, we never had an ending balance. Remember, we dipped into the fund balance to pay for our expenditures.
Gotcha.
That's what brought it down from 41 to 19. That's that 21.
The fund balance was at its lowest point at the end of 2018. However, as Dr. Beasley has already shared, it is expected to rebound sharply at the end of the current fiscal year. And the expectation is that it's going to end between 40 and 50 million. As of today, the fund balance is expected to end at 48 million. And again, that's a sharp rise.
I should say this, sometimes I hear people say that, I've even heard recently, and I had to correct, someone says that we had a deficit. You all need to correct that if you hear that. That is incorrect, it's inaccurate, we don't have a deficit. We may have spent, in the prior year, we may have dipped into our fund balance. But when you say you have a deficit, that means you're spending more than what you have. We've never spent more than what we have. We may have dipped into our fund balance, our savings, but we don't have a deficit. And so if you all hear that, and the fund balance, if you had a deficit, guess what your fund balance would be below? It would be below zero. And so inform people, and I don't mind informing people who are uninformed. I will let them know that we don't have a deficit.
That's why we have the TAN.
Well, the TAN, that's a good question. The TAN helps us when we have low cash flow. Remember, we count on property taxes, right, to help us make up salaries. Well, sometimes property taxes, depending on how soon they get the notices out, the funds come in rather slowly. So we have to wait on the tax commissioner to bring us a check. He can't bring us a check until he collects the taxes. So when those lows occur, that's when cash flow, if you don't have a high fund balance, cash flow is low, therefore you take out a TAN to help you through. And what's a TAN? A tax anticipation note, which means it's just a loan until you get your taxes that you will need to make up your cash flow. Does that make sense?
And look, I'm gonna make one more comment, and then we want Ms. Benson to do her presentation, and we can ask questions after, if y'all don't mind. Because there was a comment about the TAN, and we acted as if we didn't want to do it the other year, but the Board of Education, Clayton County Board of Education, have been doing TAN since 2006, and that is a general thing that municipalities do, so it wasn't anything that we hadn't done before. All right, Ms. Benson.
Thank you. projected increase in fund balance is a great testament to how the district strategically collaborated internally and externally with our stakeholders. As the board can see, we started the school year with approximately 18.6 million. We budgeted as a part of FY19 an increase in the fund balance of 6.4 million. Coming in for this year, we anticipate surplus revenue of 3.6 million. And we're seeing an unanticipated, unused budgeted expenditures of 19.3 million. That's how we get into 48.8. 48.0. Fiscal year 2020 state budget passed the House on February the 28th, 2019, and it is awaiting Senate approval and the governor's signature. Our fiscal year 2020 state revenue budget will account for approximately 70% of the general operations fund revenue. The state budget, as passed by the House, includes an increase in the state salary scale for teachers, principals, assistant principals, counselors, psychologists, social workers, media specialists, and special education leaders. However, in Clayton, we are proposing that all employees on the teacher scale will receive an average increase of 6% or $3,400. The recommended budget also includes an increase in the equalization grant funding for enrollment growth, funding for T&E, or training and experience. The net increase to Clayton County Public Schools is $17.6 million from the state. That's an increase from $324.7 million to $342.4 million. There is more good news to share.
Listen, could you please repeat that last sentence? Something about it, difference and increase from something or something.
Yes, so we can see an increase from this year of $324.7 million to $342.4 million. That's a $17.6 million increase. There's more good news, as we can see on the chart. We are projecting an increase in local revenue of 6.4 million, which is a 4.7% increase year over year. Here's another view of the anticipated revenue. We are projecting a total of 24 million increase from FY19 to FY 2020, an increase in revenue, 24 million. And as the board can see, 17.6 million is coming from the state, and another 6.4 is coming from local revenue. The balanced fiscal year 2020 budget is projected to maintain a fund balance of 48.8 million at June the 30th, 2020. A healthy fund balance of this size is required to meet Government Accounting Standard Board Statement Number 34 and Board Policy Descriptor Code DCL. And Dr. Beasley has already talked about the 15%, and our policy says between 7.5 and 15%. Fiscal year 2020 budget was developed with the following goals and priorities in mind. First, the superintendent wanted to ensure that we continue to focus on a healthy fund balance. The recommended budget includes a minor increase to the employer portion of the teacher's retirement system. That's required from the state, and you guys have the breakdown. The board has the breakdown on the budget worksheet, along with the restoration of transportation, energy, and other essential budgets. As we all know, that we had a mandate in FY19 when we were developing the budget, where Dr. Beasley and the board asked district that we reduce operations spending by 50%. And so we know that we need to restore certain budgets because they cut too deep. So included in this budget is a restoration of those budget areas. The team also focused on improving curriculum and instruction, student support, and expanding scheduling, accounting for additional earned positions through growth, also operations. So here's another look. The recommended additional increase for FY 2020 budget total approximately $30.7 million. And again, on your budget worksheet that the board received this week, we have a clear breakdown of what makes up the $30.7 million, the increase year over year. Every employee paid on the teacher scale will receive a raise. Additionally, the superintendent recommended budget calls for a step increase for all employees that are not on the teacher scale. So employees who are on the teacher scales and all other employees. The recommendation is that everyone receive a raise.
What amount?
We're gonna let it get to the end, but then we got to get some clarity on that.
We have the answers.
Okay.
We have the answers.
Oh, no.
All state funds provided to Clayton County Public Schools through the governor's provision will be used for all staff on the teacher's pay scale. The step increase for all other employees not on the teacher scales will be funded with local funds. Additionally, all employees who are paid on grades 13 through 19, and for the Board of Education, I've included all of those positions for you. So it's grades 13 through 19. The superintendent is recommending that they receive a $1 per hour increase on top of their step increase. Positions which are paid from salary grades 13 through 19 include, but they are not limited to, custodians, bus drivers, bus monitors, paraprofessionals, clerical staff, maintenance positions, and also nutrition workers. Budget increase for the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, School Improvement, Student Support, Operations, and Equity and Compliance. Each decision to include an improvement was carefully thought out, analyzed, discussed, measured against the priorities, the mission, and the goals of the Board of Education. The Division of Curriculum Instruction includes the addition of salaries and benefits for 5 additional lead teachers and $5.7 million of funding for textbooks, student-based initiative, and compensation for high school department chairs. The Division of School Improvement budget includes an increase of $625,000 to add 3 assistant principals positions and 2 school-based custodians, as well as funding for district graduation. The Division of Student Support budgets includes an increase of $3.1 million to add 19 positions, which includes additional lead teachers, ESOL teachers, behavior intervention specialists, and a world language coordinator. In addition to that, the superintendent recommends that all of our part-time counselors move to full-time, so we're adding an additional 9 counselors. Funding is also included for the communities and schools and Georgia Virtual Schools. The Division of Operations budget will include an increase of $100,000, and this will support 2 additional farms. The Division of Equity and Compliance will add $240,000 to their budget to cover the increase in risk management and insurance premiums. Finally, included in this proposed budget is $1.5 million for substitute teachers usage. This will bring the budget in line with current spending and historical trends. Here's another view. More than 66% of the general operation budget are directed towards instruction. All of this, the blue area is instruction. An additional 7% is devoted towards school administration. Yet another 3% is dedicated to instruction support. Maintenance and operations make up approximately 9% of the total general operations budget. Transportation makes up 5%, and general administration, business services, and central support services make up 4% of the total budget. Over $20 million has been added to the proposed budget for instructional purposes. An additional $3 million has been added for student support. The function areas include the step increase and the recommended salary adjustments for eligible employees. Here's a summary of FY 2020 budget. 29.4% of the district revenue is expected from property tax in fiscal year 2020. 7.5% of the district revenue is expected from the state QBE formula. Currently budgeted general fund revenues are planned at $485.7 million, and expenditures are planned to be $485 million. The estimated ending fund balance is planned to be $48.8 million for fiscal year ending 2020. Thank you for allowing me this time to provide the Board of Education with this information. I will take any questions you have at this time.
Okay. Can we go back to who gets the raise? You said the people on the teacher. So are we saying, is that teachers and social workers, or just teachers, or?
On the teacher scales,
Yes.
anyone on the teacher scale, so that would be your teachers, your counselors,
Yeah.
social workers, etc.
What about principals? No?
Principals are not on the teacher scale. That would be the all other group.
Okay, well, I thought he said certificated employees, that's not what the government said.
He says teacher scale.
Okay, well, I just wanted, so, did we say, are we doing anything for principals?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
She said the other.
Okay.
So if you look at your worksheet,
well, I'm looking, but ours is not as,
do you have this?
yeah, but I'm trying to,
Here's more detail on this.
I need some more detail, that's.
So on this sheet, Ms. Corey, step down, you see 14 million on the teacher scale. Then after that, all others, not on the teacher scale, 2.8.
Okay. Well, I know she sent it to us, I just needed a little bit.
Right.
3%.
How many? Okay.
Because, yeah, on here,
13 years, 14 years.
Flat.
They get a step plus $2,775.
The teachers, on the
Yeah. They get a step plus $2,775.
So on average, all employees on the teacher scale will get approximately 6% increase
okay,
to the
So they get-
tune of $3,400.
okay, I wrote that.
Now,
down.
some people will get a lot more than that, and some people will get just a little less than that.
Okay,
But on average, everybody on that scale will receive approximately a 6% increase.
So the one step and the $275, $2,775, that equates to 6%?
About on average.
On average.
okay, but I wanted to ask, I thought that the other day we got, I guess I need to pull out my phone. I thought that the Senate had, let me see.
The AJC reported that they changed it to 3,000.
Uh-huh.
And so we're waiting on them
Okay,
to make that
okay, all right.
adjustment.
I just wanted, because
So
I
it's
don't.
about 200 and something additional more dollars.
Right, okay, oh, Mr. Strike, I'm sorry.
Let me be clear, that the increase, the salary increase is based off of the governor's plan. It's not, okay. So we're not doing a increase and waiting for the governor's increase.
So let's make sure. The governor is proposing to increase those on the teacher scale.
Right.
So we're gonna make sure they get the governor's increase.
Right.
Plus, we provide a step, which is locally funded.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
And that's what Ms. Benton said, the average is about
3,400.
okay?
So on top of what he's giving, we're
We're gonna
giving
let
our
them they're gonna step up as well, and so that percent on average is about 6%. That is not bad. For those who are not
But
on
we're
the
still waiting for his communication.
well, honestly, we've got to wait for a signed budget, so
Right.
the session is over on April 2nd.
Right.
And so really, you know, if the board tentatively adopts the budget on Monday, then we wait, by the time we get to the end of April, we should have the governor's signed budget and all these numbers are firmed up and confirmed, et cetera.
Dr. Beasley, the vote will actually be April 8th.
April 8th, okay.
The presented budget, not.
So this is just a proposal
That's
based
correct.
on the estimate of
That's
what the governor.
Ms. Bowles, did you?
I did. I want to talk more about the TAN. So I think I heard you talk about how it helps us with our cash flow. Two questions. One, what is the amount of the TAN that we've been taking? And my second question is about the cash flow currently. I noticed you've discussed it goes up. So at what point, no matter how normal it's been in the past, at what point is a TAN no longer required?
So, we got a 10 last June, I think it was last June, of about $40 million, to get us through our cash flow shortage. We paid it back at the end of December. If we continue with how we're moving now, we're not necessarily estimating or projecting that we will need a 10 this year. If our fund balance stays at the level that it is, we are not projecting that we're going to need one. But it's all about how our cash is flowing. So this year, I know that for the county, they send out their property bills late. And so that impacts how we receive money in. And so if there's a glitch, again this year, we may have to. But of course, we're always watching that, we're in communication with the county.
Is the fund balance right now over $40 million?
Yes.
So with a TAN being $40 million, what glitch do you foresee could even inspire a TAN?
So the fund balance now is over $40 million, and I think in your financial information this year, I think it's in the 70s for the month of February. So right now, we have a healthy fund balance. The numbers are looking good. However, the summer months are slow months in terms of revenue from the county. Obviously, at this point, we're not projecting that we'll need one in the summer. However, if there's a glitch with the bills and the property tax digest and those things going out late fall, that may impact what our needs are.
Okay, and curious about that because I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it carries monthly interest of
It does.
over $100,000 a month.
Well, it varies based on the interest rate, and varies based on how much you borrow. Because we loan 40 million, I can't remember, I think the interest rate was over 2%. That was almost $100,000 a month.
So
That's a lot of
just,
money.
so that's important to
Yeah.
me.
That's a lot of money.
I'm also thinking about how it's good to hear we probably don't anticipate needing one,
Yeah.
but any way to avoid that interest with such a healthy fund balance, to me, just seems like.
Absolutely. One of the things that, excuse me, Ms. Gordon, one of the things that we've implemented in business services, we're looking at how we invest our money. So as our fund balance is at a healthy level right now, we've invested our resources, all of the extra money that we don't need, so we're drawing interest.
Nice.
And I'm happy to say that it's a pretty good amount on a monthly basis.
Great. And you're referring to interest-bearing accounts that we're storing money in, right? Okay. And then my second question, you talked about the operation budget being cut around 50% in previous years and how there are restorations this year. Was that in some of the things you were talking about, or could you share what some of those restorations were? Or was that what you meant when you're like, in curriculum and instruction we're doing this, in student support we're doing that?
Not necessarily that area, because we didn't cut in curriculum and instruction, but it was more on the operation side of that house, like transportation, maintenance, gas for the buses. Those areas cut their budget way too much. They did cut it by 50%, and some people cut it by a little bit more, but obviously the number of kids that we take to school every day has remained the same, if not increased. So you can't cut your budget by 50% because you know you need the money. And so those are the types of things that we're restoring, because we can see that currently they're spending more money than what they have, and there's no sense to put them in that situation again for 2020.
Dr. Beasley, I'm not able to pull this up. You're good doing that since Ms. Lowe's asked about the TAN. The document that you sent us about the TAN, I just want her to know that with the TAN, we've been doing the TAN since 2006. It's what we generally do, because with the way that our taxes come in at the end of the year, we don't want to go into the fund balance. So I don't know if he sent it to everybody, but if we could if he could send that to all the board members, so if there's another question about the TAN, that it's not something that we just decided to do. The other year the board has done that since 2006, and of course we don't want to, we wish that we didn't have to have a TAN, but I just want everybody to know, so if there are other questions in the community about the TAN. I was trying to find my email that I sent, but I couldn't.
I think I received that email, and I'm less concerned about how long we've done it and more seeing when we can stop because of that monthly interest.
But I just want you to be clear that it's not
new.
It's not new, and if it has to happen again, it's going to happen, because we're not going to bankrupt ourselves to, we want to keep the fund balance there.
So the worst case scenario was last year where we borrowed 40 million, right?
Right.
So we have 48 million in reserve. It just seems logically we shouldn't have to what?
Right. Exactly.
Borrow.
Right.
And so
Right.
the goal is always to ensure, but as Ms. Benton mentioned, the glitches. We're always, when you look at that chart right there, local property taxes, 137 million. We're dependent upon that money to make up our budget. So if that money is delayed for any reason, late tax notices, or something happens in the economy and folks stop paying taxes, does that make sense? Then that impacts our cash flow, and our goal is to ensure that employees, when they take their checks to the bank, they should be able to cash their checks without drawing. And we're going to always make sure that happens, even if it means we have to take out a what?
And we got to also remember, with the market falls and things of that nature, when that market falls, more or less, we've got to go in and do what we need to do from there.
I think my confusion must be then about, it sounds like the TAN is for a fund balance support. And so if we're talking about funds between July and December, that sounds like 6 months, like half a year. And so I think I just need to understand more about these flows being in and out, because if it's temporal and it sounds like everything's temporary, then I'm wondering, and none of this is real for this upcoming year, right? This is all hypothetical. So we can table this conversation. I think I need to learn more though about how we get to a point where, because it sounds like money's there, it just makes us feel more comfortable when the fund balance is at a certain level. And it may even be a legal requisite, right? This is something y'all need to tell me if there's a legal number required in the general fund balance. But if for 6 months we're paying over $500,000 in interest, it sounds like there could be a way to circumvent that. And we're doing that this year. So
we get taxes you pay taxes, but you get that in December.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pay my taxes on time, so if Clayton County Public Schools depended upon my taxes,
Then you wouldn't get it.
then you wouldn't get it until January. I have to pay a penalty every year, because I pay Clayton County school taxes, and I live in the city of Riverdale, so when it is Christmas time, so I have to have my priorities, and mine is Christmas.
Ms. Foley, you're not exempt yet?
And no, I will be exempt next year. I'm 65. I can't wait to be exempt. I'm sorry. Amen.
Ms. Bennett, just two questions. One is, can you explain that additional $17 million? Did we miscalculate the QBE? Did they increase the QBE?
Well, that's a great question. So go to that chart, Ms. Benson. And you can see that.
And lastly, just so that you can, the second question is, you said 5.7 for curriculum and textbooks. The textbooks I thought were coming out of SPLOSH account.
They did last year, not this year.
Why would we choose not to take it out of SPLOSH?
Because, you know, we had a reduction with the aviation taxes, so we're trying to make sure we have enough money in SPLOSH for all the projects that we have.
If you want to do your projects, what you said you
What was that?
If you want to do your projects.
Yeah, no, I didn't realize that. You
Especially
shifted back and
Especially with
forth.
the loss of the aviation fuel taxes.
So it's not mandated that the textbooks come out.
You know, we can always shift them if we see that the funds are there. We're just trying to manage that situation.
So here's the increase that we are projecting from the state. Based on what we know now on the state salary scale, we're projecting that we're gonna receive $10.8 million. In addition to that, we had an increase in our FTE, and then we also are receiving additional money for training and experience, and that's $3.8 million. Our equalization grant increased by $6 million.
What is an equalization grant?
An equalization grant is a grant where the state looks at all districts, and so those districts that fall within the lower quartile, they receive additional money so that they can kind of make the playing field. So we're in the bottom quartile, and so we're receiving an additional $6 million.
But at the same time, our local 5 mil share is increasing that we have to contribute.
Right, by $3 million.
We should state, I'm sorry.
Oh, go on. And that takes away. So that's why we have that in red here, because we're required to not so much.
So you may ask, so we know that the governor's given us the 10.8 million because of teacher increases. Equalization grant gives us 6 million. The 3.8 million, that money is because of the work that our principals are doing in building better master schedules. And so
Absolutely.
they've been trained, and for the last 2 years, we've been increasing the revenue by building a better master schedule, maximizing the funds that we earn for gifted, for remedial education, for elementary early intervention program, for special education. Our principals, our principals have been doing a great job.
So I'm assuming that the year prior or 2 years prior, that was non-existent.
Yes, when my first year superintendent, we trained principals on how to do that. And now we're seeing the benefit of it.
It was in the slide, I think you said anticipated surplus of revenue of 3.67. Where is that coming from?
3 points anticipated revenue?
Yeah. Anticipated surplus revenue,
Oh, yes.
right there.
Anticipated surplus revenue. So part of this anticipated surplus revenue is coming from the state. It's the increase in our FTE for QBE, and some of it is coming from local.
You all, I don't know if you know this, but Clayton County had the largest percent increase in house prices for the metro area. We had almost 13%, which is good for our tax.
Very good. That's why.
Okay.
Last question is you were on certain slides, you were reading certain things, and I would love whatever you're doing. You talked about, like, you would look at a slide and say such and such percent comes from this and that. I would love to know those appropriations, like where those come from. So whatever you have already, that finding its way to us.
Yeah, we do. Oh, just waiting.
That 3 million we paying out, what is that for? Just the local 5 million we share. Go back to the screen you were just on. Yeah, so what's that for paying?
So the local 5 mil share is it's a law by the state, so we are required as a district, all districts are, to at least contribute 5 mil to your education piece. And so the state calculates our QBE earnings, and then they deduct what the expectation, the baseline expectation is. And so our local 5 mil went up by 3 million.
So let me say it a little differently. Every school district collects local taxes. They expect every school district to make a contribution to the state. And so, even though we collect $131 million in local taxes, we have to kind of like a tithe.
That's right.
We gotta pay our tithe to the state. And because there are some districts around the state who don't collect as much money, they need that money to help them at least offer a basic quality-based education.
That's the great. Now. Your hand up.
No.
Do we have any more questions?
Nope.
That's it, Ms. Jasmine.
So, and if you all have any, I'd like you to ask them today, because on Monday, I just want Jada to be ready to release our release to let our folk know this is what we're proposing, and I want us to all be on the same page that these increases we all support, and we're good on it. And it's going to make I think Jamie, we have a 91% return their contracts.
95%.
95%.
Ms. Bowles just said, we would like those notes.
Yes,
because,
please. That's helpful.
we need a whole lot more.
And I'll be sure to, as I internalize this information, I'll ask the questions as they arise, but I ask everything right now, I just don't want to, commit to not asking any further questions.
That's what you're supposed to do. And please, everyone, in light of that, let's make certain that we have received we have our agenda and we have everything. So please read over your package and please send any additional questions for the other areas to Dr. Beasley so that we will have your answers. Monday, I know you are probably meet or something so that we don't have a lot of questions Monday that we could have asked, over the weekend. But I think Ms. Boyer will get into that when she does her presentation.
And it's just helpful if you know your questions, so staff can spend time putting it in a manner that helps you to understand, so you can respond to your constituents. That's important.
Because I'm gonna say that you look smart when you're in your package and know what's going on, not when you out in front of everybody asking questions.
We good? I think we're good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. It's 9:13, so which one?
Well, what you guys want to do, you want to kill this?
That's really good.
Yes, great job.
Thank you, beautiful. I appreciate it.
Oh, and you put one? Yes, we are gonna need a A little 5
That's
minutes.
okay.
You wanna take a break?
Let's do 5 minutes.
Okay, it's 9:15. Let's
Seem to
come
have
back at
people
9:15.
have disappeared. We had a schedule.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have Zinda here. She has returned, so that's a special privilege.
Oh, boy. Okay. Thank you, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, first of all, I want to let you know that my name is Zinda Bowie, and I just found out I have like a cousin in here. Not really doing the same name, and that's exciting for me. I am here on behalf of Georgia School Board Association, and I want you to know that I appreciate your suggesting that it's a pleasure to have me here. In Georgia, we have the situation wherein board members are required to have the training, so it doesn't necessarily end up being a joyous occasion. So thank you. I'm going to let you know now that I will be reading. I'm going to read because I am a former school board member and I have the floor and I don't want to be off track. So I'm going to be reading. I will not be reading what's on the screen. I hate when I go to a meeting, somebody is reading exactly what's on the screen. So I'm not going to do that to you. I would ask, however, that as we go along, if you have questions or comments, stop me, because that helps this to be your training, okay? I want to first ask you to recognize that Georgia School Board Association is your membership organization. And so to that end, remind you that you are members of District 6 for GSBA, and that your district director is Sue Brown from Coweta County. If you will look in your packet, on the left side, there is a little orange bookmark looking thing, which references GSBA's The Hub. Hopefully you're all familiar with it, but if not, please get familiar, because it's an opportunity for you to hook up with your district director, who can take information, questions, suggestions to the board of directors, and also should be able to help to link you with other school board members around the state. That's especially important for Metro Atlanta school boards, because you are looked at as Atlanta while they are the rest of the state. There is a lot that can be shared. It doesn't matter if somebody's in Brunswick or in Perry, in Houston County, it does not matter. You all have the same kinds of issues. It just means maybe the yours are a little bit larger. So please keep that in mind. Also, I'd like you now to refer to your folder so I can make sure that everything is in there that you should have. So on the left side, you should have a brochure of the legislative priorities. That too is a benefit to you from GSBA. Those legislative priorities are not developed by GSBA staff. They are created by the Governmental Operations Committee, which is made up of school board members from around the state. And if you have been keeping up with Capitol Watch online, Angela Palm gives you information on a daily basis about what's going on under the Gold Dome. So please make note of that, because citizens will ask you. And the thing that you need to know is that those are the legislative priorities that are determined by school board members collectively. It does not mean that every single thing that you may have wanted is in there, but I hope you also know the process for getting your legislative priorities considered. There should also be an agenda. I know you have an agenda for the training for the day. This is an agenda that is prepared, and on the reverse side of the agenda are the objectives for today's meeting. And we are going to provide your attorney with a copy of the packet. I did not do that, but he's still smiling at me, so it's okay. Those objectives directly come from the 8 domains prescribed by the State Department and the State Board of Education. So that's just, sometimes we ask were these objectives met, and we haven't given you anything. We started doing that on the reverse side. Then there should be the PowerPoint for today, and it does have some lines for you to take notes if you'd like. There is an evaluation sheet behind that. Please note that the evaluation sheet is being provided now because we are required by the state to have you evaluate the training. So please do that, and I know you're going to be looking at me funny when it's time for you to go into executive session, but such that I might not hold you up. I'm going to ask that you would go ahead and make your comments as we go along. The other thing is, yes, there are check marks and only a few lines, but there's a whole blank side on the reverse. If there are things that happened today that you think need to be improved, if you have suggestions, please write them down. I don't know your handwriting. Print so I can read it, but it's not personal. It's so that the next time you see me or somebody from GSBA, we won't do the same thing that got on your nerves today, okay? Okay, on the right side, there is a copy of the GSBA ethics brochure. It is not as slick as what we used to send out because it got too pricey. But that's the ethics brochure. Underneath that, there should be a sample school board protocol. Then there is a list of superintendent board member expectations. And finally, a checklist for the superintendent evaluation. Does everybody have that? Okay. All right. Well, that will allow us to get started. And the topics I've been asked to cover are governance structure and superintendent evaluation. And hopefully we can do a little bit about school board meetings. We won't be able to get into depth about that, but we'll do a little bit about it. So when we talk about governance structure, we do want to talk about the role of the board. And I'm not going to stand behind you because you won't be able to see me already. Okay. Now, this slide, although the state of Georgia does not require board self-assessment, we're not focusing on self-assessment today. I'm going to ask this governance team, I'm going to refer to the governance team intermittently because the state has also designated that you work as a team with the superintendent. That is fairly new, fairly recent. In my experience, that was not always the case. Used to just talk about the school board and the superintendent, but you are referenced as the governance team. So I ask that you think in terms of the way you function as we go through our time together this morning, and that you look at the governance team collectively rather than focusing on individual members, because we always have, you know, like when we're in church, and the sermon is going, and we always think, ooh, I wish Marion were here to hear this, because this is for her. Well, we really don't need to do that, because for you, it's the school board, okay? You are a unit. Now, if I happen to step on toes today, it's not personal. It's rather my effort on behalf of GSBA to assist you, the education board, in improving your posture as a leader in public education. And I say that because school boards throughout this state and our nation deal with the same issues, as I mentioned before. They have the same concerns and challenges. So we're going to take heart and learn from the experience of others. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Now let's be real. Clayton has a huge hurdle to overcome. While you might not have been a member of the Board of Education in 2008, there is still a cloud identified by the general public of the state of Georgia and beyond. And you know what I'm referencing, okay? It was a loss of accreditation. And the school district continues to wear the unfortunate mantle of being a first. You have to keep that in mind, because in order to ensure the success of the school system, specifically the success of Clayton County students, you as members of the governance team must model the way. And I will say that although that occurred, there were good people on that school board. There were people who tried to do the right thing, but the whole board got painted with one brush, and subsequently, school boards are painted with that brush. I can now go someplace workplace and say that I am from the state of Georgia, and one of the first things they'll talk about if we're in an arena of education is, oh. So, it's there, it's real, but you can overcome it. You have that opportunity. So, I would suggest that you look at yourself as a governance team, critique your operations, your presentation during meetings of the board and beyond. So don't get it twisted. If there is tension among members of this team, there will be tension throughout Clayton County Schools family. It trickles down, inevitably. If there is dysfunction among the governance team, then there is dysfunction in the administration, and then among the teachers, and what happens? Disciplinary problems go up through the roof. I've seen it happen. Clem, I know you've seen it. So we want to make sure that you maintain, when we talk about governance, you do the right thing. Please know, first of all, the school board hat never comes off. You could be in Walmart, you could be at the BP station, you could be at the football games. It does not matter. That school board hat is there. People know who you are. They know where you live. They'll show up at your door on Saturday morning. How do I know? Been there, done that. So that school board hat never comes off, so you have to be extremely careful about that. And the superintendent is not an exception. Okay? So let's talk about governance structure. It's important to understand that the school board has to function as one unit. There is no authority that lies with any individual school board member. And everybody gets that, right? You are only the board when functioning as a whole in a legally called meeting. Elected board members have to recognize and support the role of the superintendent as CEO, so that you're certain that he is free to do the job and to supervise school district employees without intervention from board members. Okay? Superintendent needs to be aware of any concerns firsthand. I was delighted to hear your board chair indicate that any questions should be directed to the superintendent. That it is protocol, it makes sense, then he can decide which of the school district staff should handle those concerns. Personnel matters are the purview of the superintendent, and the public doesn't get that. The public decides that you hire people, that you fire people, that you promote, but that is not what the board does. You respond to the recommendation that comes from the superintendent. Is that right? Everybody understands that. We got to help citizens to understand that. There are four major aspects of the school board. Four major roles when we talk about the school board, and they are vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. But I'm going to try to move through this because we want to make sure that we get to the superintendent evaluation. I know that's important for the day. Vision, that's how you determine the future direction of the school district for the benefit of students. And that's basically using the strategic plan to guide the system. We could spend a whole 3 hours talking about the strategic plan, how it's developed, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to do that today. But just know that when we talk about vision, it basically links to your strategic plan. And everybody is familiar with the strategic plan, right? Let me challenge you as a board. Everybody ought to be able to, don't memorize the strategic plan, don't even try that. But everybody ought to have some point of reference from that strategic plan that pushes your button, something that excites you. And I would challenge you to develop a 30-second elevator speech about that one area where you can talk to people and say, here's how we're doing, this is what's happening in that area. And then you refer them to the strategic plan which is posted, right? Okay, so just have something to help them to know that the strategic plan is alive and well and working in Clayton County. Structure. The structure is the relationship between the board and the superintendent, that the board has accountability for the CEO everybody's gonna talk to you about who should be the football coach. Okay? Who should be the principal of the middle school, etc. You have accountability for the superintendent only. But one of the major responsibilities of the board is to name the superintendent and then to support that person while allowing him to do the job. School board members direct their concerns to the superintendent. You already made that clear. The next essential piece of governance structure is understanding that the superintendent takes direction from the board, not from any one member. It also pleasing to hear board members ask for information and then say that it would go to us. Because if the superintendent responds to a question, then the information is shared among all board members. Does that make sense? Okay, so you should all be receiving the same information at about the same time. And let me just stop here and make one other suggestion. I think it's going to come up later, but you're talking about the budget. You got great information today. Everybody asked their questions. You're going to have another opportunity. But something like frequently asked questions, people reference it as FAQs, because the superintendent indicated we all need to be on the same page. What page is that? Because when we walk away from a meeting, a movie, read a book, we all have different things that we pull from it. So it can be helpful if you have some piece of something to which to refer so that you are all saying the same thing. It doesn't have to be scripted, but you're giving the same information. Because we don't retain everything that we pick up in the training, do we? Okay. All right, so see, I'm already off track. But anyway, the superintendent works with the school district staff to handle day-to-day operations of the district, and that's in sync with board policy and with the strategic plan, both of which are approved by the board. Board support of the superintendent is tantamount to the success of the district. I cannot overemphasize that. Okay? And I don't know Dr. Beasley. You know, I've met him once before. I don't know him. It's not personal for him. It is essential for these students. And that's why you're here, right? For the benefit of the students. The next one is accountability. In the area of accountability, it covers the board of academic, board self-assessment, legal compliance, and fiscal fitness, which is what you dealt with this morning. Board members should frame every question, every decision around the question. What does this have to do with student achievement? If it doesn't have anything to do with student achievement, why are we talking about it for 45 minutes? Okay? Student achievement is the board's highest priority, and board members should expect to receive regular reports on student progress, student needs, and spend time during every meeting discussing ways to increase achievement. And I hope that you're doing that. I'm sure you are. Okay. Georgia law requires, and this is accountability, that the board evaluate the superintendent annually. Additionally, the board should evaluate itself. Now that's not required, but taking a look at your own performance as a unit and understanding the key work of the board is really important. Remember that the board is accountable for the actions of its members and is responsible as a component of accountability. The school board must condemn the behavior of any member violating the statewide model code of ethics. Look at on your in the ethics brochure, page 7. Take a look at that because that deals with what your responsibility is. And please know, I am not suggesting that you all start cutting each other and pointing fingers, but if a board member is doing something that is outside of that statewide model code of ethics, you've got to do something. And take it from me, the board did not do that in 2018. Everybody wasn't messing up, but if you take it at the beginning, any of us who have children will know that you got to deal with that behavior when it first starts. If you allow it to continue, then you got a major problem. So among yourselves as members of the governance team, it's not the superintendent's responsibility. It has to be elected official to elected official if something is going awry. And many times a board member is out of compliance with that code of ethics, not maliciously, just failing to understand what it means. Am I making sense? Okay, so that's part of accountability. The other thing is that the school board members depend upon the superintendent to keep them on track relevant to legal requirements, making sure that all the board policies are up to date and aligned with the strategic plan. Because you have your board attorney here, that gives you an extra, because he is paid to keep the board out of trouble, to make sure that things are aligned. And if he notices that something is out of sync with the law, he's going to tell you. Is that right? Okay. Okay, so that's the other thing that's a part of accountability. Also, you monitor the board's revenue and expenditures. You ask appropriate questions, as you've done this morning, in order to communicate that fiscal information to the public in a way that is understandable. Education finance is complicated and does not always make sense. Our public doesn't realize, for example, that there is a capital budget and an operating budget. So when you start renovating a building, what are they going to come to you and say, wait a minute, the teachers didn't get a raise? They don't realize that you cannot mix and mingle those funds. I know I didn't realize it until I got on the school board. So it's incumbent upon you as members of the governance team to communicate that in a way that's understandable. And part of that is staying away from acronyms. Thank you for spelling out TAN. Everybody doesn't know what that is. SPLOST. CPRCI, whatever those letters are. I always get them mixed up. Yes. But we use that within meetings, at workshops, etc. And what that does is it turns people off, and it also makes them think that you're being less than transparent. What's really going on? So please, as you go through your meetings, even though you probably don't have standing room only, unless it has something to do with cheerleading. But if there's anybody in the audience, we must act as if they are attending a board meeting for the first time. So make sure that everything is explained. And one thing I would beg you not to do is to say, Mr. Superintendent, can you tell us what TAN stands for the benefit of the audience? Because then you put them down again. Just ask the question. If you've got somebody presenting to you and they have used an acronym, just ask them, and what does that stand for? That's all you have to do. It makes a world of difference for your community. The finance information is so complicated. GSBA does have a finance toolkit on its website. I think there are about 36 slides. You can make them your own. It is so understandable that I have been able to use it. I'm not a numbers person. I don't do finance if I can help it. But I have been able to use that. And you make it your own. It has places where you can put in the Clayton County information, Clayton County logo, etc. You don't have to use all 36 slides. That's the other thing. You use it as you need it. But please reference that. All of that is a part of accountability. The next part is advocacy. You are the liaisons to the citizens. You give them current information on education-related issues. Hopefully, you've been keeping them up to speed about what's going on under the Gold Dome. And that Capital Watch Online is extremely helpful because it's in everyday language. Now, Angela Palm has a wry sense of humor, and she makes her comments and makes her opinions known, but you're still getting the information. And that can be helpful in sharing it with the community. As we talk about advocacy, you're going to the Gold Dome to talk to your elected legislators is fine, except there's a handful of you. And those legislators will listen to you, and then they'll go back to business as usual. So it works if you can get a brief message out to citizens who can then support you. We need this in Clayton County. This will be detrimental to Clayton County. All they have to do is send an email, tell them don't write a dissertation, 2 or 3 sentences to say support House Bill number whatever. We need it in Clayton County. They can do a text message. They can leave a voicemail. We still have the anthrax fear, so it takes a long time for mail, U.S. mail, to be opened. But encourage them to support you where it's needed, to support public education with our elected officials so that those things that are important to Clayton can happen. For example, the thing about the teacher raise. That impacts different districts different ways. 3% in Clayton County doesn't mean the same thing as it does in some places in South Georgia. Help people to understand that, okay? That's really important. That is part of advocacy. Remember that as a governance team, you have to do what's best for students throughout the district. So, we talk about constituents, but you cannot represent people who live in your neighborhood. Yes, you can bring information forward, but they are dealing with what they think is best for their child, their next door neighbor, the student who attends their church. You have to think globally. You are accountable and responsible for all students throughout this district. It doesn't matter if they look like you, if they speak English or not, if they go to your church or don't go to church at all. You are responsible for students who live in Clayton County. So, you can't function the way the city council members do. You can't represent Mrs. Wilson who lives next door. It's got to be what's best for students. Okay? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's go for it, because they don't feel that way, all right? Let me finally say on advocacy. The effective school board member always requests to the appropriate person utilizing the chain of command. I don't know what the chain of command is, and Clayton County is different for every district, but you all need to be clear as to what it is. Some school boards have business cards, and the chain of command is on the reverse side of their business card. You don't have to do that, but make sure that every board member is thinking the same as far as the chain of command is concerned. Remember that attempts to fix the problem are always awkward. For one thing, the board member who handles matters individually becomes the go-to person as far as the community is concerned. If they think you fixed it, you become the go-to person. So if the situation gets resolved to their satisfaction, okay, make sure they know, oh, that was the director of transportation who handled that. The other thing to know is that when people come to you and you've given them the appropriate information, they are going to typically say, they didn't do anything about it. And what that means is, I didn't get what I wanted. All right? You can't worry about that. You got, with school boards, I don't care what you do. Somebody is going to be upset. And they're going to be aggressively upset. Much more than they are with the state representative, because they can get to you, okay? But just keep it in mind that if you handle things, it'll culminate into a situation. If it culminates into a situation like a tribunal appeal, then you must recuse yourself from being involved. So you don't want to do that. So I reiterate though, the way board members conduct themselves sets the stage for district-wide behavior. The relationship among members of the governance team can create a culture that is positive, collaborative, visionary, and focused on children. Or not. Okay. I have asked the question about governance team protocols. I know that you all have board policies. I know that you have parliamentary authority. It's Robert's Rules of Order, right? Do you have board protocols, board operating procedure, board norms?
Well, we actually do, but
Okay.
it needs revision.
Okay. Does everybody know that you have board operating procedures, board protocols?
I don't know. I can't honestly say. We have 2 new board members, and that would be in our B
Okay.
policy.
Let me say this.
So, that's why
The
we're.
reason that I mention this at all is because having a governance team protocol is helpful with some of the things that you talked about this morning. A governance team protocol is different from policies. You don't want everything in board policies. You know what you have to go through, the hurdles you have to jump in order to revise, amend board policies. So having something that is called board protocol, board norms, board operating procedures, see, that's something that you almost memorize. Because that's the rules, that's the way we work. That's what it says. So when I don't see everybody's head vigorously nodding that we have it, that's an issue. You may have it, but it needs to be alive and well.
Can I say something? I know from when I was the board chair, one thing we did was we called the board chair, or we called the superintendent, we run in our school or things of that nature. So I think we still we do that, we let someone know if we're going somewhere, more or less, but I think that needs to be reiterated.
And let me say this, that's a practice, and that's great, except that if I happen to be off on a tangent, and I'm not feeling it that day, then all bets are off, because it's not in writing.
Yeah,
Okay?
I'm gonna say that actually at this time we have something, but it's not, in practice, because as I said, we have 2 new members, and that was really the reason that I wanted us to have this training today, because, going forth, that is something that we definitely, need to establish.
Well, let me respond by saying that nobody asked me to include board protocols.
No.
But I recognize that it's something that every board needs, because you need to agree as to how you're gonna function. The example that you mentioned, what are we gonna do when we get ready to visit a school? And everybody ought to be operating from the same page on that. You ought to be following the same rules that citizens have. If they go into a school, they probably have to go to the office and sign in, and they put on one of those ugly badges. Well, board members should do the same thing. And there's this thing where a board member goes in and, first of all, insults the receptionist by saying, "Don't you know who I am? I don't have to wear a badge," that kind of thing. It happens. So we want to make sure that everybody is clear. And the other thing is, if it's not in writing, it just doesn't count, and it doesn't fit.
And that's what we plan to do, Ms. Boyd, right when, so the whole process.
If you will look in your packet, there is a sample board operating protocol. I'm just going to ask you to look at it briefly. It is not an extensive one. There are some boards that have the board protocol that is 5, 6, 7 pages. It includes everything. You don't have to do that, but you would get together, probably in retreat or something like that, to talk about what needs to be included. What are the things we all need to agree? And the superintendent has to be included with that, because he needs to help you to determine how you should go about certain things. It would include things like behaviors at the board meeting. If you're having public participation, do you respond? Hopefully you don't. Do you respond to questions? But if it's not written down, a board member has a button pushed and decides they got to say something to Ms. McGillicuddy because she's all face. So you want to avoid those kinds of things. The other thing is, as your board chair has mentioned, that you kind of have something like that, but if the governance team is not complying with it, then it's moot. This board protocol ought to include a communications plan. How do you communicate with your public? How do you communicate with staff? Who says what? All of that kind of thing. Typically, the board chair is the spokesperson for the board, but that is as authorized by the board. The board chair speaks for the board based upon decisions that are made at the board meeting. Now, the reporter is going to approach the person when you have had a vote, and the vote is, what is it? Y'all have 9. 8-1, let's say. Who is the reporter going to go to speak to? Exactly. To the one who voted no, when everybody else voted yes. And it's okay. You all have the right to vote no. That should be after discussion. But when the board has made a decision, then the agreement by board protocol is that the board member would say, I voted no on school uniforms, I just don't like them. However, the board has decided that we will begin with school uniforms, we're gonna get the little, and it goes on about the school uniforms, because it's not about me. It's about what's best for students. And the board has agreed that this is best for students, correct? So it's that kind of thing. That's the example I'm using. And that's the kind of thing that you would include. There's a difference between the norms and norms, board protocol, whatever you want to call them, difference between that and policy. Remember that your policies are clear, simple statements of intent outlining how the organization works. Policies are adopted or approved by the board. Policies are the what will be done. And then you have procedures, and I'm talking about procedures that you have for the school district, administrative procedures, and they typically outline who will do what steps they need to take, what forms of documents they use. That is the how. Who is responsible for the how? Superintendent. Okay? The board says what will be done, the superintendent and the staff says how it will be done. Everybody good on that? Because sometimes there is confusion. If you've ever been on the expressway and you're going along and sometimes it's hard to see the lines, they get a little fuzzy, need to be painted. Sometimes that happens in working through policies relevant to the what and the how. But when it comes to the how, that is a double solid line. And when you see the double solid line out there, what does that mean? Do not cross. Do not cross. Stay on this side. Allow the superintendent and the staff to take care of the how. That's why they get paid. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. When it comes to that working relationship, whatever you do, don't allow the board superintendent relationship to evolve into a tug of war. Okay? He has a job, you have a job. School district doesn't function effectively in the absence of a superintendent. And anybody who's been absent of a superintendent knows that. It's rough. It's rough. So the superintendent needs the support of a team of board members focused on students, doing what's best for students. Would you take a look at that sheet in your packet that says expectations? It has like 2 columns. And on one side is expectations. Yeah. One is superintendent expectations of the board and board expectations of the superintendent. That's just a suggestion. If you develop your board protocol or operating procedure, that's something that could be attached to it. That's something that the board could look, you could revise that, okay? That's not written in stone. I got it from somebody. I can't remember who I got it from. That's why I didn't give them credit. I really just don't know. But thought it was fairly good. And I would encourage you to look at it and see what would work for you. One of the things it does point out is we typically think of what the board expects of the superintendent, but we don't necessarily give much credence to what the superintendent should expect of the board. And so that's an opportunity there. Have you seen that before? I was hoping that somebody had seen it, because then you could tell me where I got it from. But okay. Okay, you don't got it. Okay, well, you got it in another workshop. That means you really look at it.
Workshop.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Member orientation, this is another.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not the first time you've seen it, so I'm trying to plant a seed. Is it wrong? Alrighty then. Okay, that's something that you can use at some point, okay? Am I doing okay on time? Yes. Okay. I think it is okay. Any questions about any of the information that we've shared? Everybody knows that stuff, right? You got it. No problem. Okay. Anybody have any idea, off the top of your head, don't look at it, what the statewide model code of ethics has to say about the school board meetings, what's the first thing that it says?
Open records. No.
Open records is definitely in there. The first thing it says in your, the ethics brochure that I've given you, school board members should attend meetings. It's domain 5. It is in that ethics brochure, and first thing it talks about is attending meetings, and that's a darn shame. You know, you're elected. Some board members are appointed initially, but you choose to be a member of the team and come to the meetings. That's what it's basically saying. And I will tell you, I've got at least 2 districts where the board chair calls me to say, we can't get him to come. There's nothing you as a board can do about that except to call out that behavior. Remember what we talked about before? And there is a way to do that. And it starts out by the board chair at a meeting just saying, board members, this is a reminder that you should be attending board meetings as possible. Now, y'all, everybody's going to miss a meeting or 2 from time to time. But the board chair and or the superintendent should be aware that you're not going to be able to attend, you're out of town, whatever it is, so that that information can be provided to the community. Ms. Bowie is not at this meeting. She is out of the state on business. So don't have to go into all the details about our mom and them. Just relevant information, okay? But board members need to attend the meetings and need to attend prepared. You talked about that today, and I am ecstatic because when you talk about reading the packet, and people do it in different ways. There's somebody probably on your board who reads every single line, has highlighting, post-it notes, etc. And there's somebody else on the board who wants the executive session, okay? Somebody else just wants the executive summary, rather. That's all they want. It doesn't matter how you do it. What is essential is that you do it. I came to a board meeting, this was years ago. I think it was here. Got to the board table, I'm sitting in the audience. And a board member, at that point, the packets were paper. Pulled out the envelope, got his pen, and would shoot opening the envelope. What does that say? OMG. So what happens then is, I don't know about you, but do y'all go to a lot of meetings? A lot of meetings. They probably told you when you got ready for the school board, it's 2 meetings a month. Yes. Okay, yes, okay. A lot of meetings. One of the things that we don't like about meetings is what? What do you not like about meetings? Wasting time. What? Yeah. Wasting time.
And asking questions when you know you ain't ready.
Well, the thing is, asking questions when you know you ain't ready, and everybody else in the room knows you ain't ready, so the question you ask. Okay, but we have a life outside of the school board governance team, do we not? If we don't, we need to get one. It makes a person a better board member if there is a balance. Spending your whole time on school board stuff gets ugly. You got the person at church. If people will tease them and say, you must live here, because every time I come through here, that person needs to find something else to do. You. Now you see why I tried to use a script. All right.
But that's a good point, because the public thinks that that's how we do is have 2 meetings. They don't understand.
They do not understand.
That, you know, it's the 24/7 job, because I get email and I work on stuff every day. Not just
well, I'm going to talk to you.
Well,
but the fact of the matter is that for your school board meeting, you want to come, you want to be prepared, you want to have read through things, and you want to have provided your questions to the superintendent in advance. The folks who work here are not paid a whole lot of money, okay? They work in public education because they want to. And when they come to the board meeting to present information, and we start asking all these questions, it doesn't make them feel good. They want to be prepared to answer your questions. It makes people feel incompetent when they have a bunch of questions that they can't answer. Now, they're not going to be able to answer all of them, but sometimes it's the way in which the question is presented. You all know what I'm talking about. That rolling your head around on your neck, tone of voice, facial expression that's more of a gotcha than anything else. That's not what we want to do. So it is with respect. It does not mean that you can't ask a question from the board table. But that question is, I just thought of this, and I'm really concerned with what color the school uniform should be. Could you look them up for us? And that gives the person an opportunity to say, yes, I'll be glad to get back to the board, not to just you, Ms. Bowie, but to the board with the response. Okay? Your public participation, do you all have that?
Yeah.
Okay, you have specific rules for public participation. Those rules are enforced with everybody who comes forward. If there is a time limit, somebody needs to be keeping time. Ms. Smith is keeping time for me today, but somebody needs to be keeping time. If I come to the board as part of public participation and y'all like me or claim to, if you're giving everybody else 2 minutes, don't give me 5. Stop me, Ms. Bowie. We thank you for your presentation. If you have anything in writing, just give it to the secretary and we'll make sure all board members get it. Thank you, Mr. Malilicock. You know, whatever. You go on. And that is the responsibility of the board chair. Handle it. It has to be done. Okay? As far as the board meeting is concerned, decorum is essential. Your board room is interesting. Do you still have that high table?
Yes,
okay.
we do. We inherited it.
That's okay. That's okay. That's what it is. The one thing you have to be careful about is posture. Now there's another board that I went to visit, and they had like recliners almost, just like that. There was a man at the board table. I promise you, he was sitting just like that, slouched back, lying down, and the thing was, he was sitting next to the board chair. Now, I was visiting. They didn't know I was there. That's what we had been assigned to do, visit boards, be at their meetings, and then, anyway, anytime he had anything to say, he'd lean over to the board chair and give the board chair the information. Nobody could hear anything. Y'all, this is a meeting of the board in public. If they were not supposed to hear what you were saying, then it would be executive session. You're in the public. We need to use our outside voice. It's not the bedroom voice that we use. This guy would talk to the board chair. Nobody knew what he was saying. It was ridiculous. And that, what it does is that creates a feeling of less than transparency. Please be very, very careful about that. Your tone of voice, your facial expression. When somebody is approaching the table, Lord, here comes Miss Blue again. Okay? You do that, roll your eyes.
We do have that one expression for this one person, and we all do, but I think she's gone now, but.
You have to be very careful. Very, very careful. You want to receive every person the same way. Sometimes we have more of a liking or more, we identify with one board member over another. That should not be obvious from the board table. Everyone needs to be treated with respect. We need to listen to opinions. Remember this, if you could just get the board packet, make up your mind, decide how you're going to vote, then you could just email your decisions in. You wouldn't have to come to a meeting. But you come to the meeting and there is debate and discussion. Debate is not a bad word. Robert's Rules of Order insists that we use the word debate. But discussion, healthy discussion. There should be, from time to time, differing opinions. One shares his or her opinion and then listens to the other members of the team. The superintendent has to be allowed to speak. We had one board chair workshop where a new board member was there having been elected as a chair, and the first question that lady asked was, when we're in a meeting, does the superintendent get a chance to speak? Should the superintendent be allowed to speak? What was obvious to me was, okay, she came onto the board to get rid of the superintendent. Okay. The superintendent evaluation, but the other thing is, you were elected to the board because of the experiences that you have, because of what it is that you can bring to the board. Bring that, share that, but listen with your ears and with your heart to what other people are saying. And then when the vote takes place, vote your conscience based upon that discussion. You can vote no, but if you're voting no and you didn't say anything in the debate, you do a disservice to your colleagues. If you're gonna vote no, they need to know that based upon what your comment was. If you're gonna abstain, tell about it, but I think what I will ask is,
A moment to have a break.
okay. The evaluation of the superintendent enables members of the team to find out what each other is thinking. It should help clear the air with any festering issues or personality-related matters. Because the superintendent evaluation is about performance, not about I don't like his shoes. Okay? And we really can't get hung up sometimes.
I would wear the badge.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Give me a wrap.
I try to also be careful about my examples when I call out a name, because inevitably, that's why I use McGillicuddy. I haven't run into her yet, but inevitably, if I make up a name, somebody in the audience is that name, so that's why I've started using Zendabui. I haven't run into any other Zendabuis yet. Okay. The superintendent evaluation confirms that the board has communicated its expectations to the CEO. And let me give you an example. I went to a board, trained the board on the superintendent evaluation. When they did the evaluation just before Christmas, 5-member board, one of the things one board member who was very strong got stuck on was everybody around us in other districts takes their meetings. We don't tape ours. We need to record our meetings. They gave the superintendent a very negative evaluation because of that. That had never been mentioned prior to the evaluation meeting. Okay, so if that was going to be a factor, you got to tell somebody, okay? If you got a teenager and you haven't given them a curfew and then you're mad because they come in at 10:15, you didn't say anything about time. So those expectations must be communicated to the CEO. It's an opportunity to recognize satisfaction of the superintendent with the job and the board. So it's a two-way thing. Through the evaluation, the board should be able to provide feedback intermittently, help keep conflicts in perspective, gauge the school district's progress toward goals the superintendent has agreed to accomplish. So folks, the major point I want to make today is that the superintendent evaluation is collaborative. It is not determined, created by the board and presented to the superintendent. It has to be collaborative. The superintendent must work with the board to determine these are the goals, these are achievable. If the superintendent doesn't agree, we need to go back to the table, okay? So the board does not create the goals in isolation. Am I making sense? Okay, now this is where you gotta stop me if something doesn't jive. If it doesn't make sense, if you think I'm wrong, and I have been wrong a time or two, then you gotta let me know, okay? The superintendent is responsible. The evaluation needs to deal with policy and governance, could be planning and assessment, instructional leadership, organizational management, communications, etc. There are a lot of things that could be covered, but let me suggest this. 3 to 5 goals are really good for you to have for the superintendent's evaluation. It doesn't mean that he's only going to do those things, but the evaluation ought to be, you can't cover the waterfront in the evaluation. And you stop me too, Mr. Superintendent, if you don't agree, because this has to be for yours. We suggest 3 to 5 goals, and what happens is you have those goals, but the superintendent has, remember, he and the staff deal with the how. The board does not dictate how this will be done. Once the superintendent agrees, yeah, this is what we need to reach for, then he and his team will develop the how steps, okay? So, evaluation is collaborative. The board doesn't determine the process on its own. If the superintendent and the school system are to be successful, there has to be buy-in and agreement that the established goals are a stretch, but they are attainable. It would be ridiculous for the board to say to me, we need you to pull down the screen manually, reaching up there at the top, right? Do you think? I mean, come on. Now, I might be able to come up with some ways, moving tables and stuff, but I will tell you, no, that's not going to happen. Now, if the screen is here and you want me to pull it down, maybe I can do that. I don't know how it works, but it needs to be a stretch. You want to reach for some things. But this thing where we set a goal that says we're going to increase the graduation rate to 100% in 1 year. Unless it's at 99%, it's not going to happen. So you want to have goals that are reasonable and that are measurable. Okay? So that is determined, again, collaboratively. The starting point for the superintendent's evaluation is the superintendent's job description. You have one? Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you looked at it? Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, that's where you start. Is the job description still applicable? Because how long have you been here?
This is my second year as superintendent.
Things have changed a little bit in that time. Okay, so there may be a point, I'm not suggesting that there has to be, but there may be a point where you revisit the job description. Some things may no longer be relevant, okay? But you want, that's your starting point, because that's what you hired him to do generically. And you indicated what his responsibilities would be in the job. And so you didn't say anything about recorded meetings, as they did in that board, and I'm not making that up. That really did happen. So you want to be careful about that. The group agrees on what accomplishments it wants to strive for the year. And it really helps if you have periodic determining factors as to whether the system is moving in the right direction. We do the evaluation, and every district does it differently. Georgia law, stop me, Clayton, if I'm wrong. See, I did something bad already. You want to talk about the board meeting? I refer to Ms. Smith, and I've been calling him Clinton. You don't do that in the board meeting because it's disrespectful. But he knows it's because I love him and I've known him a long time, so I'm sorry. But well, we have to be careful about that because depending on the frame of reference and the relationship we have with the person, that can be a bad thing. Now remember, this is the year of the woman, and what we tend to do in board meetings is we'll call everybody with a handle. And then when we reference the administrative assistant, we'll say, Sherry, could you come and do something? We have to be careful. So I'm letting you know that because we do it unintentionally. Okay. What was I talking about?
You were talking about Georgia law.
Oh, Georgia law, thank you, requires you to evaluate the superintendent annually, but it doesn't say when. So every board picks a different time. You pick what works for you. And it sounds to me like you all are talking about, is it May or June?
Well, we're actually kind of catching up because he also has to be sent something in for legal keys, and
So we don't know exactly.
Right.
Sometime in the spring.
We're trying to change some
As
things.
long as it's annual, it's okay.
Yes.
You know, just want to make it annual. But the other thing you want to do is have some kind of updates as you go along.
Yes.
To wait until, let's say the evaluation is done in June. To wait until June to tell the superintendent, you know, you never did get this right, is unfair. So the law does not require that you do it, but some kind of periodic update to let the superintendent know this looks like we're going in the right direction or this is not satisfactory is helpful. Any of us who have ever worked outside of the home know that we don't want the boss, the supervisor, to wait until all things have happened to say, you didn't do that well at all. Well, you never said anything. How would I know? So it's important that you give the superintendent some opportunity. So if you're having board retreat, you're having work session, and he can give an update, and the board can respond, that can be helpful. Now that is not the evaluation, but it certainly can enhance the viability of the evaluation. The rule of thumb for the evaluation is what most of the board thinks most of the time. And therefore, the example that I gave you was totally inappropriate, that one board member would guide that whole thing and railroad that superintendent's evaluation. That was in December, it was just before Christmas, that superintendent resigned. And that's unfortunate. Now know this, when you give the superintendent the evaluation and give them comments, the superintendent has, I believe it's 10 business days to respond. And whatever the response is should be attached to the evaluation. Okay? So we're going to kind of walk through the process. Has everybody been involved with the evaluation of the superintendent? Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad we're doing this because in order to participate in the evaluation, you have to have been trained. The law does not identify what training is. But what we're going to do is talk about your process. So stop me if I give some information and it's like, no, we don't exactly do that. But also, we want to talk about the ratings and how you come back together. Okay? All right. So I think you may have a copy of the instrument that you all use for evaluation. You brought some? Good, I didn't. Just want you to take a look at that so we're working from the same thing. And everybody should be able to familiarize themselves with that instrument. The law also does not dictate what instrument you use. So you could get one from California if you wanted to. You can use whatever you want to, but the board has to agree that this is the instrument we're going to use. Okay, so I think that your instrument does the satisfactory, yeah, oh, here it is. Oh, here it is. Ineffective, needs improvement, proficient, and exemplary. One of the first steps for the evaluation is defining what that means and not getting into the actual evaluation and changing your mind and making it mean something different. Okay? Ineffective, and you see what it says about inconsistent. All right? Needs improvement, and it means that it's inconsistent, but the superintendent has put forth, okay, this didn't work out, but here's what I'll need to do the next time. And the board accepts that. Making sense? All right, here's where we usually get a little stuck. Proficient. This says, consistent efforts as expected have been documented and evidenced. What does that mean? And the board needs to talk about it to be sure that everybody is clear and everybody's saying the same thing. Consistent efforts. So does that mean every day? Does that mean, you know, that kind of thing, because you don't need one of the 9 to get stuck and decide, you know, we fold our hands on our chest, we're done. You need to have some consensus as to what this means. So proficient kind of sends a signal as, oh, okay, good job. To me. exemplary. And we have a problem with that too, because there are some of us who say, well, the person is doing the job, that's what he gets paid to do. You know, I'm not gonna go above that. You need to agree as to what exemplary means. And the superintendent can provide some input on what he thinks exemplary means, but it's up to the board to decide and agree. Is that a problem? Don't think so? Okay. So that's the starting point. Because if you haven't agreed as to what the ratings mean, it's gonna be an issue. Okay.
I do think it's important to talk about the ratings in the context of the work, because sometimes people who are not necessarily, this is not their world every day, they don't quite know that, you know, it's very unlikely that you go from 25% proficient to 80% proficient in 1 year. But in 2 years. And so you have to really understand the work, what's really occurring, and look at that improvement within that context, and the challenges that the school system is dealing with. And I think you can't really do that unless you're having a conversation.
Hallelujah. That's what I'm looking for. And that's why the superintendent needs to be involved in that. So as you determine your 3 to 5 goals, the superintendent can give you that kind of feedback to help you understand what is reasonable.
Well, just like that man said, can provide the evidence to show, you know, this is where I moved you up to, this is where you were, and this is where we're moving to.
Yeah. And there's an opportunity there if you decide to do anything periodically. There is an opportunity. If we said that we were going to increase the number of students who are riding our buses, and then gas prices go up through the roof, well, we're going to have to do something different. We're not going to be able to put as many buses on the road as we thought. It might even be to decrease the number of buses where there is a mixture of elementary school students and middle school students. Let's change that because there's too much confusion. They're learning the wrong thing on the bus. But then things happen with something that you can't control. Those are the kinds of things that can be discussed so that as you go through, the goals might change. Something that you can't control comes along and you might say, okay, we thought we were going to do this %, we're going to decrease it. Or, as you're going along, we were aiming for this %, it's obvious that that's too low a bar. We need to raise that.
So that is exactly what I think where my head is right now. I really like what you said about the board should not write the superintendent's goals exclusively. And I think that the superintendent also should not write their own goals exclusively, right? Like I like that collaborative piece because the idea that goals can change and evolve or become smarter, right? Specific, measurable, ambitious, reasonable, time down, all that stuff. I just making sure that that's like a collaborative process.
Absolutely, because there are things the board would love to see happen. And the board's aspirations may be a little bit higher than is actually reasonable. It doesn't mean that part of that can't be a goal, but the measurable piece might need to be changed. The other thing that boards tend to do is to have too many goals. And again, the superintendent is going to be working on the waterfront. But the goals by which his performance is measured should be few. Okay? Okay. So, the thing is that you get together, you talk about what the goals will be. And then you meet with the superintendent and you all have determined the 3 to 5 goals, okay? First of all, you gotta agree that it's gonna be 3 to 5. If I walk out here and you decide you're gonna have 7, it's not my call. I'm just giving you some suggestions. Because I know how we do this thing about Zim said, but this will be your evaluation. But work with your superintendent to come up with that. Once you have developed those goals and they are agreed upon, the superintendent takes the goals and he develops the action steps. Now, he may bring them back to you so that you can see what they are. But remember, you are responsible for the what? What? He is responsible for the, yes. And that sometimes gets a little sticky. My granddaughter is 14 years old and she's telling me, oh, I know how to drive, I've been watching you. She really does think she can drive. Okay, now she doesn't have a permit yet, so we're not doing that. But I'm just saying, there are some times that we think, oh, I've been looking. You probably thought from the outside, oh, I can be a school board member. You get on the other side of the table, it's different, isn't it? It's different.
What are you talking about?
But we all went through that. It is a whole different world on this side, even for those who come from education. We have at least 2 districts where we have former superintendents who are sitting in school boards. And they have had to do a whole lot of backpedaling because they're used to being in charge. Okay, and it's a different thing. Fortunately for us, right now, yeah, those 2 are great. We've had other instances where it was not so great. And I will not share information that is not public information. So I'm never going to go someplace and call your name except for what's printed in the paper. And I'm trying to avoid the negative, okay? So get some good stuff in the paper. All right. Okay, so you've determined what the goals are. You've agreed upon those goals. You give them to the superintendent. The board and the superintendent should meet for the update. All right? Even if it's time for the superintendent evaluation, then the evaluation instrument is disseminated among all members of the team, including the superintendent. He needs to have a chance to look at things too, because if he wants to come to the board with documentation, that gives him that opportunity. But you give your personal, your opinion as to what you think based upon the ratings now. There's nothing in those ratings that said anything about his shoes. So that's not going to come up, right? You have a place for comments as well in your instrument, right? I thought I saw that.
Yes.
So you fill out the instrument and then you submit it electronically because that's the way it's being done here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and it goes to Ms. Smith? Does it go to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's the model that's on the e-board.
Yes. Okay.
So that's what we use.
So you consolidate all the,
Well, in the past, I've always given that information and the board chair has consolidated it. And they talk about it.
okay. If that's the way it's done, that's fine. It's done differently in different places. What's important is that the information be consolidated. When you submit the evaluation instrument, your opinions, your name is not on it. Okay, okay. So it goes in anonymously. That doesn't mean that you can call people out their name because your name is not on it. It just means that everything is pooled together. All right? And then it is brought back to the whole board.
Well, yes, but we're gonna do things differently
Okay.
this time. That's the reason.
How are we gonna do it?
Well, I'm just gonna give my concern over the years in that it has gone to the board chair and the board chair consolidates it and then it just gets passed out to us. And then that's been pretty much it. I personally feel like that because the board, as a governance team, it's just my opinion. I've always felt like we should have actually met as a group and had a discussion. And also, come up with, we didn't come together and consistently have a conversation with the superintendent. But,
Okay, wait a minute.
But we have not done
Okay.
that.
Okay, and what you're talking about is pretty typical. What happens is that individuals complete and they come together and discuss. All right, you can do that with the document that you currently have.
Yes.
You come together as a board and you discuss, but before you start that discussion, the superintendent comes in
Yes.
He has the same
Right.
instrument, he has gone through it, and he gives you his piece.
Yes.
Here's where we are, here's what I've done, blah, blah, blah. And while he does that, blah, blah, blah was not meant to be derogatory. But while he does that, each board member has the opportunity to be taking notes. The superintendent, you stop me if there's a problem. The superintendent then leaves the room. The superintendent does not exit the building, because what you all are having is a meeting. And that's the one time the superintendent does not have to be in the meeting,
Yes.
but he needs to be accessible.
Yes.
The board then has its discussion, and that's why you have 3 to 5 goals. Because if you got 17 goals, you're gonna be spending the night,
Right.
okay? 3 to 5 goals. So you discuss. And then what you can do is you can consolidate, because you agree on, you come to consensus. It's not a vote, but you come to consensus as to what your ratings are in each area. You can do it that way. Please understand, I'm just giving you that as a possibility. And here's the other thing. Ms. Goree has a suggestion, okay? Don't get offended. She's one person.
Right.
So it has to be a decision and agreement concurrent of the board.
Right.
You want to say something?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is that originally when we got the training for this particular instrument, it's actually supposed to be more of a portfolio, in that, like, if we did this process the way I think it should be, is, for example, like, this year when we finalized Dr. Dixie's evaluation, I felt like that what we should have goals starting at the beginning of the year, when we go into the new school year. And so the goal, let's say those 3 to 5 that you're talking about, then throughout the year, instead of us even, what's been happening is that all of a sudden at the end of the year, everything will go in and then you gotta sit and read everything. But the way this evaluation is set up is a portfolio. So throughout the year, he can put the information in the portfolio. And let's say, I don't know, like, well, let's say we just did SPLOST or whatever, you know, if that was one of our goals of the past, I'll just throw that out. We could have been saying, you know, he could put in what, you know, I had this meeting with such and such. I went over, and we would know what he's doing. And if we had a concern about any of the, of what he's putting in, then you can ask a question and he can just, it's supposed to be interactive. That's the training that I got on this evaluation, but that's not the way we've been doing it. It just ends up at the end of the year, like, we gotta get it done, and the superintendent, that's even prior to him, he just put it all in there. Then you gotta, all the board members, then you have to go back and read it, and I know some people didn't read it, because to be honest,
That's okay.
we've never had 100%
Okay, okay.
to even do it.
That's excellent, and that's what I would like to see, is that you all have it all year long.
Right.
It would make it much easier for Dr. Beasley.
Yes.
However, I have talked explicitly to E-Board and Sidley, and this document will not do that.
It won't do it?
What it will do, it will let us load, but once it's loaded, you can't see it until I make it go live.
Oh.
When I make it go live, I can't add anything or make any adjustments, because you all are doing your evaluation. I would suggest, since we have the Google Docs and you all have access to that just like employees, that we, like Dr. Beasley and I share a lot of documents. I share documents with other members of the staff for different jobs, that we have one for the board, and perhaps he can have one for each goal.
And I have already set one.
Right, that's what I was gonna say.
In that way, and all we have to do is add you all, and you all can see all the documents at any point you want to see the document, and they're organized by the goal area.
Exactly, you can just refer to that folder of documents as you evaluate on this form, or if you want me to change, I don't know if we can, I don't know how to go about that, but if this needs to be changed in any formatting, so that you could just look at the documents on Google Docs and then do your evaluation, mark it on here.
How long has that already is existing? For how long?
What? My Google Docs.
With these goals.
I have one for last year, and now I have one in in progress for this year.
So all year, you've been tracking your own progress and goals?
Correct.
Okay,
And
so
that's-
yeah, we'll
and
definitely
that's
want
what-
access to
yeah,
that.
That's what this, when
That
we
sounds
bought
good.
it, that's what
That's
it
what
said
we
it
thought, you're
did.
exactly right,
Yeah,
that's
when we
what
bought
we thought this was gonna do
Yeah.
for us.
Mhm.
And it will, we can load everything in there, it's just, you can't see it until I make it go live, and once I make it go live, I can't add anything, because when I make it go live, it's saying it's ready for you to evaluate Dr. Beasley.
And I would encourage you to let the folks who deal with Assembly know what it is that you need,
Yeah.
that you're not getting.
Well, they let me know that's in their list of,
Okay.
if we make this better.
Okay,
maybe we
well,
could
put
do
that in writing and
Okay.
copy the executive director.
Yes, ma'am.
Just, wanting to affirm that plan, like that system for organizing your documents sounds great. And the fact that it's been happening for a while also sounds great. I think my thing is about how we determine those goals. I'm sure they're based off of the strategic plan, and I'm sure I'm look forward to hearing all about it. Just that piece, right? Like that collaborative ability.
Oh,
to-
yeah. And-
But I like that you're tracking it and that it's live. If we can get should on that, that would be great. Just a way
And
to
however you all work
do that earlier.
You know, it may be that the superintendent comes to you with suggestions. It may be that there is something that has been pushing the button of the school board, and you really would like to see that. But whatever it is collaborative, and, you know, it can't be a 9-1 vote. It's got to be agreed upon. So you've got to have the superintendent pull in. Now, he is the superintendent. He is working for the betterment of the students in Clayton County. So it's not like he's gonna say, oh no, I'm not doing that. You just wanna make it reasonable, achievable, and measurable. Okay? But yes, that is the conversation that you must have. And it sounds like the suggestion from your administrative assistant is, yeah, it sounds like that could work. Are board members able to print this out the way you did?
This, not yet, because this isn't live yet.
Okay,
This, and if you're gonna look at the things in Google Docs, there may be, perhaps I could sit down with Ms. Corey and Dr. Beasley and word this correctly, because my directions and wording, or as if they're looking at them, you know, scrolling down this document, which they would not be, they would be.
well, whatever changes are made, whatever revisions take place, need to be shared with the board, and the board needs to agree and understand how it's going to be used. And that's where we have to do a step-by-step, because right here it sounds great, and everybody's nodding their head, but we've been here since 8 o'clock. So, oh, I read body language, that's one thing, I'm good with that, okay? So we want to do that where everybody does indeed understand, how do I work with this? And if it's gonna be Google Docs and then we move to something else, how do I do this?
We'll just make sure that the instructions on here.
Okay, but basically, you agree on those 3 to 5 goals. You have your instrument. You complete that instrument based upon the information you have about 3 to 5 goals. Okay, that is then what you all should come together to, not should. Typically, boards will come together then to discuss that, and the superintendent comes into that meeting, because if you have questions, well, I don't think he really did that, he has the opportunity to give that feedback. He exits, and then you discuss and determine, you can determine right there what the consensus is on the various and the 3 to 5 goals. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, after you have done that, typically, and it doesn't have to be done this way, but there are 9 of you, typically, the board chair then meets with the superintendent to share the compilation of that information, and to say to the superintendent, here are the things that are outstanding, here are the things the board feels needs to have work, here are the questions that still exist. If the superintendent has responses to that, and he might have, he can come back to the board and share that information with the board. Because going back to what we said about governance structure before, the superintendent is accountable to the board, not just to the board chair, okay? After that, the determination is, what do we do about these goals? Some of them are going to be eliminated, some of them are going to be changed. You know, what are we doing? Still 3 to 5. We don't want to add 3 to 5 onto 3 to 5 from the other year. And then we're getting ready to move toward the next term. Some boards do that evaluation in January, some do it in June. I mean, it depends. So you may not be talking specifically about a school year, but you know what the term is, the year that you're discussing.
Is it not appropriate? Is it not appropriate to do a mid-year evaluation and let them know what you're doing?
Well, that's what I meant when I said periodically. You could do it 4 times a year if you had time. You know, if you're not going to try to make that a major evaluation meeting, it could be, it's brief. But the thing is that, yes, that is a good idea. Just like you want to know what you know, how you're doing, he wants to know too. If he's going along the wrong track and this is not what the board wanted, he needs to know that before it's time to sit down for the evaluation.
Well, to answer the question, I'm going to say that there will be a practice that we will start, because I just discovered, becoming chair, that because, you know, Dr. Beasley is on the leader keys, that there is a mid-year evaluation.
All certified employees.
All certified employees. Yeah, that has to be turned in, but I've been on the board 10 years and I just found it out.
Well, we learn something new every day, don't we? Okay. You also have in your packet a checklist. Can't remember what the title of it is. But it should be on there you go. Checklist for superintendent evaluation. Well done. Okay. That gives you some, you know, kind of some markings on the roadmap. You know what? We all do the GPS now. When my kids were little, we used to use AAA triptych. Anybody remember that?
Oh, I love those things.
I found one the other day in my basement. AAA triptych. That's what you're doing here. You're kind of marking the way. Do you know that most of our kids can't read a map?
Right.
They don't have to do that anymore, huh?
The AAA triptych, I have no idea what that is.
Oh, I just brought it. Great. Yes, they can do them now, but you have to pay for it. Used to be part of your membership. I'll do I'll send one to superintendent. They were very helpful, but that's what you're doing with this evaluation, okay? Going along the way, marking things so that you're clear. That checklist may be helpful. You could revise it. Anything that I'm giving you like that, make it your own. Change it so that it accommodates what you need to do. But this is the thing. Every board member who has been trained, ta-da, this is your training. Every board member who has been trained needs to participate in the evaluation. It's like the board meeting. You need to attend, you need to come prepared. Same thing for this. It's only fair to the superintendent, and more importantly, it's only fair to the students in Clayton County. Okay? So, the board chair, consolidating all of that, well, if you meet and you had your discussion, now she may be using a laptop or a legal pad, but that's where the information can be pulled together and then given to your support staff for consolidation for the superintendent. Does that make sense? You all have to determine if that works for you, okay? But remember, the superintendent has to be involved throughout. At the end of that process, he has the opportunity to make comments about what worked and what did not. You know, he responds to the board, okay? Okay. So everybody, are you all okay with the evaluation? Mrs. Doyle? Gotta check with the attorney, make sure we're good. All right, I wanna go back briefly to the board meeting. Was there anything about the board meeting that anybody had a question about? Yes, ma'am. I can see the H's. Thank you. Okay.
I wanted to wait till you went back. Okay. Board meetings. So there's common on all boards, but the governance meets operations lines, right? The governance and I like how you separate the difference between policies and practices. Board meetings are also for the public to hear and understand. So you were making some references to the fact that we should say things so that it's clear for the audience. And I think my question is about the questions.
Okay.
Right, so when possible, I'm going to do my best to email and communicate anything in advance. If and when I either didn't receive an answer or that wasn't possible, there is a good time at board meetings for discussion. Like, tell me what you mean about the questions and limiting them versus dialogue is good at board meetings.
Okay, thank you for asking that question because I was making it kind of. You have a responsibility to ask questions. And during the budget presentation, you ask reasonable questions. You are asking to understand. The questions you present need to be questions for clarification, not questions to get somebody told. And that's what happens. The questions are presented in a way that we're trying to do a gotcha. All right? And that's not the purpose of asking questions. The school board meeting is a meeting of the board to conduct business, essentially. It's a meeting of the board in public. It is not the public's meeting. And that there is confusion on their part because taxes pay for this building, pay this one's salary, et cetera, and no, it's a meeting of the board in public. You want to do the best you can as members of the board to present your questions ahead of time so that the research can be done. Some questions are going to occur to you as the debate and the discussion comes forward. It is essential that you present those questions. It's just the manner in which you do it, okay? There is a reasonable and positive way to ask a question. And we all know that there are some of us who can say good morning and it sounds like an insult. So we need to take care about the way we raise the question, the complexity with which the question is presented, and giving some hint, some opportunity that if there hasn't been, if the research is not available today, the board would be delighted to receive this later. It's that kind of thing. So yes, you must. You have to ask your questions. And here's the thing to know. If you have a question, guess what? Somebody else on the team has the same question. It's just like students in the classroom. Nobody wants to ask because they think everybody else knows. Ask the question. You're asking the question for clarification, seeking information. But check yourself. If I'm asking this question because I didn't read the packet, it's going to be real apparent to everybody else on the team for one thing. But just you pace yourself. So there should be a balance. And I don't in any way want to suggest that you should not ask questions, but you just want to pace that. Okay?
That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
And if I may, I think it's important because I think it's very important not to have board meetings to go to 10 and 11 and 12 and 1 o'clock at night.
We won't be doing that.
And the staff doesn't observe that either. And I have been places where the board thought that that was the norm and it was acceptable, and that is not the norm. It's unacceptable and it's dysfunctional. And so the questions give us an opportunity to give you what you need. Of course, you'll have questions in public, but it's to inform, but it's the board's meeting, as you said, in public. And we want to handle the business, be very clear, be very thorough, but honestly, you know, at the end of the day, we're ready to go home too. So we want to do the business so we can end it and go home.
And just know this, for the most part, school board meetings are not exciting.
Real.
So, helping to make the business be handled expeditiously and efficiently is most appropriate.
Absolutely.
And there are boards, I sat on one, where we would start our meeting at about 5:30. Fulton County is a very long district, but I never got home before 12:31. That was years ago, but it was not a good feeling.
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't have got me.
But see, you don't want to do that. And this is the other thing. There are things you can do to expedite the meeting. For example, if you know that the meeting is going to be, you're dealing with a controversial issue that is going to consume a significant amount of time, then you want to make sure that you're using a consent agenda, consent calendar, to get some of those things that are not controversial taken care of. But that's where cooperation from among the team is important, because if you said that the minutes were going to be included in that consent calendar, to have somebody come and at the last minute say, oh, I got 5 questions about the minutes. Well, what? You should have asked those questions before, so it could have been handled. The fact is that if you have a consent agenda and one person wants something pulled off the agenda, there's no debate and vote on that. It's pulled. But that should not be a surprise. And the mantra for your board meeting should be, no surprises. The superintendent is the one who's most likely to have information that's been received at the last minute. And he'll do the best he can. It usually comes dealing with a grant or something from the State Board of Education, or some issue that has occurred very recently in a particular school or school district facility. If that happens, he's going to do his best to make sure that you all are aware. But that might require an amendment to your agenda.
And we do try, I have a pulse of when items are, this board wants to really debate the item and not including consent, and we will pull those out oftentimes prior to when we do the agenda. So that makes it a lot easier. This board really does a pretty good job, in my opinion.
Well, that's essential, letting people know. It should not be a last minute thing. Other thing to know about your meetings is that the minutes should not usurp the time of the board in discussion. Minutes are sent out to you ahead of time, and what you're looking for are the corrections. Does it say 2016 instead of 2019? Does it have me as being present at the meeting and I know I was in Europe? Those kinds of things. That information is sent to the person who does the minutes. Okay? It's sent to that person so that the correction can be made. If that correction is made and that information is then disseminated to the board, it's still a part of the consent agenda because it's the minutes as presented. As presented is what you get at the board meeting, as long as people have been notified. This was changed, it was in error. The minutes also, that's not wordsmithing. And that's what people get hung up with. It's not wordsmithing, that you would use this term rather than that. It's corrections. The minutes do need to be accurate, because 5 years from now, anybody needs to be able to look at those minutes and know what it means, which is why we don't want to use the CC thing. One of these days,
That's college and career ready performance index.
I think I have it in my calendar. I just can't get it.
Thank you. Score.
Thank you.
I think this was helpful. My main thing is just wanting us to be efficient and maximize time in meetings, but not at the loss of productive, high-quality conversation. Because this room and this space in my first 90 days is one of the first times I feel like we're talking across tables and dialogue, and that just doesn't happen in meetings, and I don't know if that's the space for it, right? It might be via email, but if and when there's time for us to discourse, debate, all of that, just want to know that, like, when and where is the right place.
You all have a work session?
Yes, we
Yeah,
do.
Okay.
so those are like every other,
Right.
yeah,
During your work session,
best
that
place
is
for
where
that
you're
dialogue.
gonna get as much debate and discussion as possible. And the thing is, then when you are at what many people call the legislative session, the voting meeting, and don't get it twisted. A meeting is a meeting. Did I give you, no, I didn't. There is a policy update dated August 2012, and it gives you a lot of information about meetings. One of those things is, and I get this question all the time, well, the board is having a work session, so they can't vote. Well, a meeting is a meeting is a meeting. What you want is, if you are going to vote on something, you want to try to make it apparent to your public. Don't look like you're trying to hide something or sweep things under the rug. But during the work session, that's where your vigorous discussion takes place, and it is as a result of the work session that you determine what can be on consent and what would not be on consent. That's why it's important for every board member to say something, either by verbally or body language. Everybody needs to know. You asked some questions in here today, and there were nods. There were no votes taken. But if anybody disagreed with what you were talking about relevant to how to go about the process of the superintendent's evaluation, then he or she should have said so. You say something to show some sign. It should not be a surprise to the team that you're going to vote no on something or that you're going to abstain. But you should not abstain from a vote unless the law says so. Now this is Zen, this is not GSBA. Unless the law says that you should abstain, unless you're missing information. You were elected to represent an opinion. And the board member who abstains from everything, one chair called me to say that she has a board member who votes no on everything, including the minutes. Somebody had a question?
Yes, I wanted to point out a couple of things too. Number one, I'm sure Sherry has sent this out to all of us about, because we've been having a little debate the past couple of weeks on email about something. And, well, actually, I should say this week about the calendar. Okay, so, I should say Ms. Smith, I'm trying to go back to what Ms. Bowie said. She gave us, everybody in here knows when the agenda about, about the agenda, the meeting information comes to you on Wednesday. You also, the agenda is not just the chair and the vice chair. The agenda belongs to the whole board. So if you all want things placed on the agenda, then you need to send it, and you've been given the dates of when you need to have it. Now, prior, we had a protocol, but I'm a flexible person, and it used to bother me that when I wanted to put something on the agenda, that I had to write a dissertation for why it needs to be on the agenda. This is the board, and of course, you can let us know what you want on the agenda. And you can put, your rationale, because more than likely, Dr. Beasley is the one that will have to address it. But it's not just us. So it would help if we don't have these debates about things. If you have some issues or things that you want to discuss, then let's put it on the agenda and have a discussion about it. And let's have a vision and plan for the school district. Also, wanted to point out the e-board. When Ms. Smith puts she said the board packet is not in paper anymore, it's e-board, and I believe that it goes live. Is that correct, Ms.?
For board members only.
Right, right, and then it becomes live for the public, so the public sees
It becomes live.
not that day.
Until Sunday.
Right, so
the day before.
Right, so the citizens see everything that we see, except they don't see executive session. So when we're saying, I know that, we're saying that we want the public to understand that, for us to have a discussion of whatever, but I guess we need to educate our public to let them know that you can look and see what we're talking about as well. So that it doesn't seem like that anybody's been transparent, you know, that we're not being transparent. If we have a quick meeting and we vote on everything and, you know, it's not that. So.
Well, here, let me give you a suggestion. For one thing, remember the protocol I was talking about?
Right.
That's where, in writing, it will say, in order for a board member to get something on the agenda, this is what is done. It needs to be in writing, because this board may have a practice of doing it one way and it works real well. It doesn't take but one new person to come on and say, I don't see it anywhere, all bets are off. So, put it in writing, put it in writing. You don't have to make it complicated, but put it in writing. The other thing is that your agenda is available to your public, and so you want to be careful about amending the agenda. The law allows you to amend the agenda as it becomes necessary, but you don't want it to be routine, okay?
Excuse me, before, I'm sorry, Representative Clayton has been graced himself. He came in and he sent us a nice message for school board members. We decided wanted to acknowledge that Representative Clayton came and joined us today.
That was a good move.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. I just observed, and congratulations on Board Appreciation Week. Congratulations on SPOTS, well fought, great participation and collaboration. And I will tell you this as I leave, that superintendent has my vote of confidence. Y'all have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No pressure. Okay, but just remember with any of those things, you know, there are opinions about things, but you all need to agree. You need to bring that together. Let's see what else with the board meeting. Your executive session, you know that you make a motion to go into executive session, you include the topic. When you are in executive session, it may be informal, but you still need to allow the board chair to process things, to call on people in turn. Make sure that if Ms. Bowie has spoken to the issue several times, then you allow another board member to address it, because I've been so vocal. You don't want any one person to dominate the meeting, okay? Everybody needs to have an opportunity to speak. Is there anything else anybody wanted to ask about your meeting?
No, but one thing that I did want to mention, I'm not sure if our new members, do they have a copy of Robert's Rules? I know we had given everyone like the Robert's Rules.
Okay, let me say something about Robert's Rules of Order. All right, let's be careful with that. Robert's Rules of Order is a reference tool. You go to it when your board policies and Georgia's law do not address an item. And the reason that I stopped you, Madam Chair, with Robert's Rules of Order is because here's Robert's.
Oh, I don't want that.
Okay, this is Robert's.
I want the one
Robert's Rules is, and I have gone into a board meeting where somebody walked in and did this. Okay, that's a problem. Robert's Rules, if you're going to use it, you should go to Robert's Rules of Order in brief, which is the yellow paperback. It still references the 11th edition or Robert's Rules for Dummies. That works well. Both of those deal with meetings, and that's all you want to talk about. But the other thing is, the operative word is tool. It is a reference tool. It is not a weapon. And you do not want to, Roberts was set to expedite the business. You do not want to spend time in a meeting arguing about parliamentary procedure. You go by your board policies and Georgia law. If neither of those address it, then you can go to, well, Roberts says, and that's done calmly and gently. Okay, we're not wielding a knife here, okay? The other thing is that Roberts is often in conflict with Georgia law. Roberts says, for example, if somebody moves, I call the question, which means I'm tired of talking about this, let's move on. And somebody else seconds it because it is a motion. Roberts says it requires a 2/3 vote to pass. what does Georgia law say about voting? It's a majority. So you gotta go by Georgia law, and now, that's just an example. So just be careful. If you wanna familiarize yourself with meeting procedures and protocol, look at Roberts and Brief. It costs it's somewhere between $8 and $10, but use it as a reference, and it'll be more handy for your homeowners association to help you than it will be for the board. But you do want to have some generic idea about the order, okay? Are we good? We're good. Mr. Doyle is smiling, so. And the thing that I said
Robert's
about...
rules always makes me smile.
Okay, the reason that I said that thing about the handles, I don't want y'all to get hung up in it. It's just that we need to be consistent. If we're all calling each other by first name, then that's all well and good. But you don't want to mix that up. Now I have one last thing that I want to do, and then I've got to pass this around. I have the sign-in sheet for you. This is the sheet that you need to complete for documentation of the time this morning. Please sign to the far right of your name. If the information there, your address is incorrect, if your name is misspelled, would you draw a line through it and rewrite it? Dr. Beasley doesn't have a real line for you, but we'll make a space, okay? I will sign the document saying that you were here and that I'm not related to anybody at this table. In the meantime, I want to share something with you, and I think I had 3 baseballs in my car and didn't bring them in. Oh well. But if you don't mind, can you give me just a minute to read something? I'm actually going to read this to you, okay? The relationship, just pretend that I'm holding a baseball in my hand. The relationship between the school board and the superintendent can be compared to that between a baseball pitcher and the catcher. The catcher has responsibility for watching the entire field of play, for knowing all the players on the opposing team who come up to bat. The catcher advises the pitcher as to what kind of pitch would be best based on what the pitcher knows about the batter. The pitcher decides to accept the catcher's recommendation or to shake off that recommendation in favor of a different pitch. Once there is a decision between them, the pitcher throws the pitch and the catcher reacts accordingly. The superintendent is the catcher. But in the public education ballgame, we're not trying to get any player out. The batters are public school students, and our goal is to make sure they all get home runs. First base is elementary school. Second base is middle school. Third base is high school. And home plate is high school graduation. Infield players are the staff members working in the schools. Outfield players are those in the central office and support staff, bus drivers and others, who work on behalf of the entire school district. The catcher, the superintendent, observes everything and is aware of what students need for success. He makes recommendations to the pitcher, the school board, about what pitch, vote, budget, whatever, is necessary to move the school district forward. The school board ultimately votes the way it chooses. That's throwing the pitch, and the superintendent responds to the pitch by implementing appropriate action. Hopefully, the decision or pitch will result in students getting around all the bases and across home plate to graduation, as well as giving those in the field what they need in order to do their jobs according to expectations, which are the goals and objectives in the strategic plan. When necessary, the catcher and pitcher meet on the mound for private conversation. That is executive session. And what is discussed on the pitcher's mound stays on the mound. While this may not be a perfect analogy for the board-superintendent relationship, it may help picture how the relationship can be effective. Now, since the board is a singular entity with multiple components, we might think of the board vote like the hand holding a baseball. And here's where I would hold the baseball, which is kind of my problem. If there is a 5-member board and only 3 members vote to support a recommendation, consider a ball held by 3 fingers in preparation for the pitch. Notice that all fingers on the hand go with the pitch, even if they aren't touching the ball. When action is taken, the school board speaks with one voice, even if the vote isn't unanimous. You all can practice that throwing the ball with the two fingers off when you get home. This is just to remind you, it's team. Okay? I got that from somebody too. Have no clue as to who it was. I borrowed it.
You steal a lot of it.
I do. It has to be done, yes. Okay, any questions? Okay, I need the evaluation sheets as well, please.
My name was left off, so I'm just.
Did you write it in? Please do. This is the information we have at GSBA. That's why I was asking you about the number. Somehow, I don't know how it happens, but I will turn this back in.
Lord, I can mess every day.
Okay, I don't know, because I don't prepare these anymore. But I'll find out, okay? And I apologize to you for that.
All right, we got one more thing.
Yeah, I know, executive session.
I'll check with Jeannie, and it may be that Jeannie's information has not gone in, something like that. We'll fix it. Anything else? Okay, I got no question in executive session. If you need anything, let me know. And I'm gonna take a picture of the trip and send it to you so you can get to this photo. Y'all give me a break.
You all need, no, we'll have it in here, we'll let the staff leave out.
And when